1985. In the far north of Bhutan, along a border so badly mapped its mountains had barely been measured, a team of climbers set out to claim one of the last great prizes left in the sport, the highest unclimbed peak on Earth. They had the permits. They had the season. They had everything a first ascent needs. And then something absurd happened. They could not find the mountain. They were standing almost in its shadow, and the charts were so wrong that they could not agree which wall of ice was even the true summit. That was only the beginning. It would not be the only peak that refused to be stood upon. 2 ranges away rose a summit shaped like a fish's tail, one that a single man may have climbed in secret and then buried the secret with him. Higher still stood the 3rd tallest mountain on the planet, where the 2 climbers who first reached the top chose to stop a few feet short of it on purpose, and where every expedition since has done the same. All 3 are among the most coveted summits in the world. All 3 have turned back nearly everyone who ever came for them. And in every single case, the reason had almost nothing to do with the difficulty of the climbing. This is not a story about mountains that are too hard. It is a story about mountains you are not allowed to stand on, by law, by faith, by a taboo older than the countries that guard them. Welcome to Forbidden Peaks. Viewer discretion is advised. Our first mountain does not just hold the record for the highest unclimbed summit on the planet, it may hold that record forever. Gangkhar Puensum, 7,570 meters of ice and storm on the Bhutan side of the Himalaya. The name means White Peak of the 3 Spiritual Brothers, and for most of modern history, the outside world did not even possess a reliable photograph of it. Bhutan was closed, sealed off, deliberately, all the way through the golden age of expeditions that had already planted flags on Everest, on K2, on Annapurna. While the rest of the great peaks were being ticked off one by one, this one sat in a locked kingdom, unseen and unmeasured. Then, in 1983, Bhutan cracked its door open and permitted mountaineering for the very first time. And the climbers came fast, because here, impossibly late in the 20th century, was a genuine 7,000er that had never once felt a human boot. A first ascent of that size was the kind of achievement that makes a career for good. Between 1985 and 1986, 4 separate expeditions came for it. Every single one of them failed. Not one team reached the top. The mountain was brutal, remote, and wrapped in the kind of weather that turns a climb into a siege that ends with retreat. But the deepest problem was never really the ice. That first expedition, the one from 1985, ran into an obstacle no amount of fitness could solve. The mountain had been mapped so poorly that the team could not reliably locate the summit at all. Different maps disagreed about where the high point even was. Imagine training for years, crossing the planet, walking for days into one of the most isolated corners of the Himalaya, and then standing among a wall of ice giants, unable to say with certainty which one you came to climb. And behind that confusion sat something the maps could never capture, what Bhutan itself believed about its own mountains. To the people living in the high valleys of Laya and Lunana beneath that summit, Gangkhar Puensum was not an objective. It was alive. It was home to protector spirits. And to the Migoi, the creature the West clumsily flattens into the word Yeti. Locals spoke of strange lights moving across the high slopes, of sounds with no source, of apparitions crossing the snow where no person could be. To them, sending men to trample the summit was not brave, and it was not sport. It was an insult aimed directly at something that could answer back. So the kingdom began quietly closing the door. It had only just opened. In 1994, Bhutan banned all climbing on any peak higher than 6,000 meters, out of respect for the spiritual beliefs bound up in them. And 10 years later, in 2004, it went the whole way and prohibited mountaineering altogether. There is one strange, almost cinematic footnote to how badly the outside world wanted this summit. In 1998, a Japanese expedition thought it had found a loophole. They obtained permission not from Bhutan, but from China, to approach the mountain from the Tibetan side and slip around the ban entirely. And then the loophole slammed shut in their faces. A border dispute between the 2 countries got the permit revoked before they could ever use it. So in 1999, the team settled for climbing a lower subsidiary peak instead, a summit called Liangkang Kangri. and then they went home. The true top of Gangkhar Puensum stayed exactly as it had always been, untouched by anyone. The most determined mountaineers on Earth had thrown 4 expeditions and an international workaround at this mountain, and it had shrugged every one of them off without a single person reaching the top. And here's the question that should bother you. 4 expeditions, world-class climbers, a door that stood genuinely open, however briefly, and still nobody stood on top, not once, before the whole thing was sealed by law. Was it really the weather every single time? Was it really the maps, the remoteness, the thin and murderous air? Or is there something about a mountain that an entire culture insists is inhabited? Something that makes the boldest people alive turn around just short of the goal and quietly call it bad conditions? The record books offer a clean answer. Highest unclimbed mountain in the world, closed permanently by national law. Case closed. But a clean answer is not the same thing as a true one. And the harder I looked at the men who came back down empty-handed, the less certain I became about why they really turned around. I don't know. But what happens when the mountain isn't sealed behind a national border at all, when it stands in open view above a tourist town, and one man may have quietly climbed it anyway, and then never lived to prove it? What happened on this next peak might change how you read everything you just heard about the first one. Because if this second mountain was climbed in secret, then the forbidden rule was already broken once, and nobody was ever punished, and nobody can be sure it wasn't. Nepal. Above the lakeside town of Pokhara, where trekkers sit with their coffee and stare up at one of the most photographed silhouettes in the entire Himalaya, a twin summit that splits at the very top into 2 blades of rock and ice, so that from the valley floor, it looks exactly like the tail of a fish rising straight out of the earth. Machapuchare, the Fishtail, 6,993 meters and closed to all climbers by the government of Nepal. To the Gurung people who live in its shadow, the mountain is sacred, tied to the god Shiva, and its summit is simply not a place where human feet belong. There has been exactly 1 sanctioned attempt in its entire history. In 1957, a British team led by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Roberts sent 2 of its climbers, Wilfred Noyce and A.D.M. Cox, up the North Ridge. They climbed well, they climbed strong, they climbed almost the entire mountain, and then, roughly 150 feet below the top, with the summit close enough to touch, they stopped. They turned around and went back down. Because the expedition had been granted its access on a single condition, set personally by King Mahendra, that they would not set foot on the actual summit itself. They kept the promise. 2 men, within a rope length of a first ascent that would have gone down in the history books, honored the deal and walked away from it. No climbing permit for Machapuchare has been issued since, which should mean the summit of the Fishtail has never, in all of human history, been touched. Should. Because there is a story that will not go away, no matter how many times it is dismissed. In the early 1980s, a New Zealand climber named Bill Denz is widely believed to have slipped onto the mountain illegally, entirely alone, and soloed it. No permit, no team, no announcement. If that is true, then Bill Denz is the only human being who has ever stood on that forbidden summit, and he did it as a crime against the mountain and the law both. And here is the detail that turns a rumor into something far colder. In 1983, Bill Denz was killed by an avalanche on Makalu, a completely different mountain, far from the Fishtail. Whatever he did or did not do up on Machapuchare, whatever he saw from that twin summit, went into the snow with him. There is no summit photograph, no confession, no proof one way or the other. Only a mountain that is supposed to be untouched, and 1 dead man who may have touched it, and a permanent silence stretched between the 2 that nobody left alive can ever fill. You are looking at a peak thousands of people photograph every year, believing no one has ever stood on top, and you genuinely cannot be certain they are right. The forbidden line may already have been crossed once by a ghost. 2 mountains now, one that turned everyone back, and one that may have been quietly conquered by a man who never got the chance to tell the tale. And the pattern is beginning to sharpen, because notice what neither story is truly about. Neither one is about a summit that is simply too steep or too high to physically reach. So, What if the single strongest proof of the rule is not a mountain people cannot climb, but a mountain people absolutely can climb, one that is summited every single year, and that they still refuse to finish? On the border of Nepal and India stands the third highest mountain on the entire planet, Kangchenjunga, 8,586 meters. Unlike the first two, this giant is not sealed off from anyone. It is climbed regularly, and still, to this day, almost nobody stands on the very top of it. Kangchenjunga is home, in the belief of the local Lepcha people, to the deity Zoeanga, and its true summit is regarded as sacred ground that must not be defiled. When Joe Brown and George Band made the first ascent on the 25th of May, 1955, they climbed the whole mountain, all 8,000 and more meters of it, right up into the death zone. And then, a few short meters below the actual high point, they stopped, on purpose. Because before leaving for the expedition, they had made a promise to the Chogyal, the ruler of Sikkim, that the sacred summit would remain untouched by human feet. 2 days later, the second pair to go up, Norman Hardy and Tony Strother, reached that exact same spot and did exactly the same thing. 4 men, a few steps from the top of the world's third highest mountain, who simply chose not to take them. And that single act of restraint became a tradition that has held for 70 years. Decade after decade, most climbers on Kangchenjunga, including modern commercial expeditions carrying clients who paid staggering sums to be there, still stop a few meters short and leave the true summit alone. It may well be the only 8,000er on the planet with that custom still intact. And this is not frozen history either. A politician in Sikkim has recently pushed to ban climbing on the mountain outright, invoking India's Places of Worship Act of 1991, arguing that the peak itself qualifies for legal protection as a site of worship. So, this is a live, unfinished argument about whether a mountain summit can be legally defined as sacred ground. So, what actually connects a mountain nobody could find, a mountain one dead man may have stolen, and a mountain thousands could stand on, but simply won't? There is a single idea buried underneath all three, and the moment you see it, the pattern stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a law. Call it the desecration frame. In the mountaineering tradition the West exported to the rest of the world, a summit is a problem to be solved, and standing on the top is the solution, the conquest, the achievement, the whole point. But to the cultures guarding these 3 peaks, the summit is not a prize at all. It is a living deity, and putting your boot on it is not a victory. It is stepping directly on the head of a god. Every contradiction in these stories dissolves the instant you accept that the Guardians were never playing the same game. Look at all 3 again through that lens. Gangkhar Puensum was not lost because the maps were bad. It was protected by an entire country that decided a spirit's home outranked the glory of a first ascent, and then wrote that belief into national law so no one could argue. Machapuchare was not merely closed on paper. It was so sacred that even the one team ever allowed near it turned back 150 feet from immortality rather than commit the offense. And the one man who may have ignored the rule carried the truth into his grave rather than boast about it. And Kangchenjunga is the clearest proof of all, because there the offense is completely optional, easy, and preventable. And still, generation after generation, the strongest climbers alive walk right up to the line and refuse to cross it. Not because they cannot, because some part of them quietly agrees. You can hear that same agreement in the words of the greatest climber who ever lived. In the mid-1980s, China offered Reinhold Messner, the first man to summit all 14 8,000ers, a permit for another sacred mountain entirely, Mount Kailash. Messner said no. He suggested that to conquer that summit would be to conquer something in people's souls, and told them to go climb something harder instead, since Kailash was not so high and not so difficult anyway. That single refusal is the whole thesis of this video. The most accomplished mountaineer in human history, standing in front of a forbidden mountain he was invited to claim, understanding better than anyone that the summit was never the actual point. Some of these peaks may be climbed one day. Most of them, if the people who live beneath them keep any say at all, never will be. And perhaps the strangest thing this brutal sport ever learned is that the truest measure of a climber is not every summit he reached, but but the one he chose to leave alone.